Now this doesn't really need saying, but I've been playing a lot of the beta for Back 4 Blood, and to cut a long story short, it's good. It's not perfect, but it's not terrible either. I've had a lot of fun with it and I absolutely love this game, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone since this is a genre I live within most of the time, but that doesn't mean I'm blind to its problems, which, after playing the beta, there is certainly a lot. Don't get me wrong, the beta is a massive step up in the right direction of the game overall compared to the alpha, but there's some steps that Turtle Rock have made which I personally don't like. And before I go any further, I just want to clarify that I won't be mentioning any technical issues I had with the game. Any crashes I had I think were due to me running Windows 11, and I'm pretty sure my CPU is on the way out. The game's overall performance, however, is a lot better than the alpha. In the beta we had a total of 2 campaigns to play through, and while I was writing this I realised that my opinions of the campaign haven't really changed all that much from the alpha. This is easily where the game shines the brightest, and in the beta we got to revisit the story set in Evansburg from the alpha alongside another campaign where you start in a diner and make your way towards a barn. And after playing roughly 40-ish hours of these 2 campaigns, I loved the campaign mode. These levels are really fun to play through. The difference in objectives for the finales is a welcome change from the Left 4 Dead formula of holding out and waiting for 10 minutes or fueling a generator or car. In the first campaign you fight your way back through a ship and blow up the bridge, while in the second campaign you're loading a howitzer and destroying a dam with the chance of an ogre to spawn on harder difficulties. It's a lot of fun and I love what they're trying to do to make it a bit more involved. I especially love the scenario where you have to rebuild a safe room while being bombarded by a horde. I'm hoping over time we see them add a bit more variety into these objectives in each campaign so it can stay fresh for a little longer, but a cool feature they've added in this beta was at the start of every level a random challenge card is thrown at you. These are basic little things like trying to get to a safe room within a certain time or not alerting a horde, or finding a container and taking it to the end, and these will give you extra supply points and copper, and these are just a nice little extra challenge for each run. The one thing I wish Turtle Rock would do is add splitting paths to these levels though. I've mentioned during the alpha that the lack of alternative routes is definitely going to hold the replay value back, and with the added challenge cards being a main gimmick of this game now, having different routes would provide more obstacles and challenges for each of these runs. Another thing I noticed as well is while they were talking about a campaign in one of the trailers, we now have a rough idea of how many levels they're going to have in the game. We know that there's a total of 4 acts to choose from, with each containing 2 campaigns, which I assume will roughly be about 4 levels each, meaning we've got a total of 32 levels to play through, which I'm more than happy with. Something I'm not happy with, however, is the versus mode. It's pretty bland and not that good. The versus mode in Back 4 Blood is pretty simple. It's just a survival mode where one team sets a time while the other team tries to kill them, and then the roles switch and the second team have to beat that time. It sounds simple, and that's because it is. When playing as the Ridden, you have a shared upgrade system with your team, which you can fund points into stuff like offense, defense, and abilities for special Ridden and for the common horde, and you get this by dealing damage to survivors. When you're playing as the survivors, you're given a brief time to scavenge for equipment, and then once the timer starts, you're basically pushed into a small radius where you have to remain and hold out for as long as you can, and this radius will lock in at about roughly 5 minutes. Originally I was just going to say this mode is shit and move on, but that was because I had a really bad first impression with it. After playing it a little bit longer, it's not terrible, but the wow factor dies off rather quickly, and I also realised the only time you're ever having fun with it is when you're winning. The first game of Versus I had, I got beaten and immediately went, this is terrible, I hate it, and I went back to the campaign mode. Later on, I decided to give it another go, but this time with a group of friends, and it ended up being a lot more enjoyable. But that was only because we were powerhousing through each round and winning. What doesn't help matters with this mode is that people can just rage quit when they want to, and there's no penalty for this. Players barely join mid-game and no bots are introduced to replace the missing players either, so in fact you're basically just powerhousing one person. And it got so bad at one point that we managed to survive for 10 minutes because there was only one player on the enemy team, and he wasn't even doing anything. Is it fun? Sure, I guess. Will it last? I highly doubt it. I imagine this will be like World War Z where the PvP mode is just forgotten. However, it is clear as day that this game needed the campaign versus mode. The shared team upgrade system for the Ridden is a brilliant idea, and it would make each run more interesting. If Turtle Rock had made this the main focus point for the PvP, then this game could have possibly had a little niche mark in the genre, but instead we got this. And I imagine it was done this way because they delayed the game and they needed to cut something short. And moving on, with the Ridden, I feel like the variants needed to be ironed out a bit more because they're currently a bit of a mess. The idea of having a variant for each type of special Ridden is an interesting idea, however for both modes I feel that this is executed a little poorly. So going from the website, we have a total of 8 special infected with some having 3 variants to them. So for example, the Tallboy has a variant that smashes and also another that grabs you. They're very simple changes to the enemies, however defining what the variant is the problem. If we take in comparison a game like Killing Floor 2, then you know when you're facing an alpha variant of a clot because it's pale, but when it comes to Back 4 Blood, these changes aren't as subtle. Don't get me wrong, they certainly look cool, but when you're in the middle of a horde, you don't really notice and it's too late. I think personally it should have been determined by the cards that were shown to you at the start of a level, similar to how it was done in the alpha, or the variant should stay locked into the versus mode for the sake of trying to introduce balance, or give the variants a more distinct look. It's bearable now since there's a few special infected locked off, but in the full game when you have 8 special infected, and also the new infected that are coming post-launch, this is going to get confusing really quickly. When it comes to the survivors, however, personally I do like them. I like their designs, I think the specific abilities they have are interesting and is honestly a good fit for the game, but something about them doesn't feel right. I'm glad we're not hearing Holly saying ding ding we got a winner every 5 minutes now like in the alpha, but I feel there's a bit of wasted potential with each of the characters' personality. I've seen a few complaints being thrown around that the writing feels more like forced comedy rather than world building, and after playing certain levels over and over again, I've started to notice this. You'll hear more jokes from characters rather than hearing something relevant to the world itself. In fact, I can only think of 2 times where story building is even mentioned from the survivors. The first would be in the second level of the first campaign where Hoffman accidentally upsets Mum for calling survivors cowards as she lost her son, and then the second time, during the first level of the second campaign, the cleaners will mention that Hoffman was desperate to go on this mission, and if he's not there, they ask why. If he is there, he'll tell you that he's trying to look for his dad. It's things like this I want to see more of in Back 4 Blood, and it's certainly a concern with having them introducing more characters post-launch, as storytelling isn't that easy. The beauty of Left 4 Dead was it was built around 4 survivors. Outside of them, no one else existed, so you can easily build a story and relationship around them. In Back 4 Blood, we have 8 playable characters, and then everyone in Fort Hope, survivors scattered in various safe houses. It's entirely possible for everybody in this game to be given a personality, but it becomes a lot harder. If there's one bit of advice I could give them though for the survivors is I would take a note from Overkill's The Walking Dead. And while yes, I'm aware, this game is dead and most people hated it, one thing this game did right was giving characters personality in-game in the levels. Instead of making jokes when entering certain areas, characters would actually make a remark of their surroundings. I always remember in the first level, Hell or High Water, Grant would complain about the fast food joint you enter and dine on the side of the first camp. Yet instead, when you meet characters, your survivors don't really respond to them, they just kind of ignore them. There's a good example of this in the first campaign where a woman will shoot herself over the radio and no one seems to respond to it, which I should also mention that you only hear the one recording every single time. And what doesn't help with this is due to all the rather corny jokes that are thrown into this game from the survivors, you can't take this seriously. And thinking about it, it reminds me of a saying from Left 4 Dead.
Oh man, at first it was funny, then it just got sad, but then it got funny again. Oh man.
So once you beat either the campaign or a round of PvP, you're given supply points that can be put into a supply line back at Fort Hope. These supply lines basically have cosmetics like weapon skins, outfits, emblems, and also more cards for you to play around with. For a method of a mini progression system, I like the idea. From what I've experienced in the beta, getting supply points isn't difficult and supply lines don't even demand that much. The most I ever saw was one card roughly asking about 100 supply points. However, this does raise concern about the post-launch supply lines. Due to how vague Turtle Rock have been about the monetization system in this game, we have no idea what's in store. So it's either going to be a store with an obnoxious timer, or we're going to see a mini battle pass system hidden within these supply lines. I can't say for sure, but as long as the cards and new equipment aren't locked behind these, I don't mind too much. From what they've said, so far it sounds like the microtransaction system won't be in the game at all from launch, which I hope is the case as there's some other systems that could use more attention at the moment, like the in-game AI.
God damn it, Walker's down!
It's pretty bad. In the alpha, I never really got a chance to notice this due to having to play online with people at all times due to matchmaking, but due to an early bug in the beta, it caused a lot of issues with matchmaking so you wouldn't have a full lobby. So I got a chance to encounter the teammate AI, and it's shocking how bad it is. They barely function properly, barely help you when you're downed or pinned, they teleport all over the place from player to player instead of running around semi-freely, and they don't even pick up health kits. Instead, you just have to babysit them for the most basic things, and if you're playing on a harder difficulty, AI does take trauma damage as well, and most of the time they refuse to use the healing station. We'll get onto trauma damage in a bit, but this makes higher difficulties harder than they already need to be. And the Ridden aren't much better either. I've seen them get caught in map debris, sometimes just walk away from you for no real reason. The spawn points in this game are horrendous at times, and instead of spawning somewhere where you can't see them like in most games, they just spawn around the corner or right in front of you. It seems to be they've copied the versus spawn system, which doesn't really fit in the campaign mode. Sometimes I wish I could just ignore this and enjoy the game, but when a bruiser just pops into existence right in front of you, it's hard not to notice. It doesn't ruin the enjoyment of the game though. All buggy AI nonsense aside, the hordes in Back 4 Blood are dealt with quite well, and they have a great arsenal of firepower to benefit this. The gunplay in Back 4 Blood feels a lot better than the alpha, which frankly is impressive because I rather enjoyed it back then. Plus, compared to the alpha, we have access to all the current weapons in the game, and man, there are a lot. We have a nice selection of snipers, SMGs, rifles, shotguns, sidearms, and I don't think a single firearm in this beta feels bad. Even the melee weapons feel a lot better. In fact, it's gotten to a point where I choose to play Holly over anyone else because I enjoy using the fire axe and baseball bat so much, which is impressive because they were the shittest things in the alpha. I won't deny the option for melee weapons is rather lacking at the moment as there's only 4 to choose from outside of the combat knife and fists. But I'm glad Turtle Rock listened and overhauled the system completely. Instead of a melee weapon stopping mid-swing on impact, it will cut clean through an enemy, which makes dealing with a horde so much more efficient. It's still a challenge on special Ridden, but with the right cards, melee can make quite a difference. Plus, they can cause quite a lot of damage to friends, so it's not all bad.
And now I can game properly without being— You mother! Goodbye everyone, thanks for tuning on the stream. I really hope you had a good time. This was Back 4 Blood, and please unsubscribe from Sir Cracker Bulb immediately!
Now, while I'm quite happy with the changes they made to the weapons overall, the new additions they made ruin it slightly. So originally in the alpha we only had access to a couple of weapons that all featured a star on the HUD. At the time my assumption was that it was a tier system, meaning better weapons like a Barrett or a Scar would be 2 stars, similar to something like World War Z. Since then however, Turtle Rock have changed it completely to a rarity system, and this does not fit at all. This introduces the scenario where you have to change weapons every 5 minutes because you've just found a rarer weapon with better stats, which if that was it alone, sure, that could have worked, but with the addition of weapon attachments which also have rarity levels and can't be removed without swapping out parts, this makes this weapon system overcomplicated and rather inconsistent. If it was just the attachments, sure, I could probably let it slide. However, because the weapons are included, it just makes finding rare weapons pointless, as you might have a grey tier weapon with a legendary magazine or some other buffs that increase damage and reload speed, but that makes the rarer weapon weaker, so you don't want to swap out because you lose all your attachments. The weapon system went from a fun idea in the alpha to an overdone multi-layered gimmick in the beta, and again, like a previous concern with characters, with more weapons that the game adds, this system will become more and more bloated and constantly growing a concern of power creep. A problem I'm starting to notice with Back 4 Blood is they're adding a lot of gimmicks to try and help make the game more unique, which is fine at times, but nothing is ironed out properly, making it a mishmash of broken ideas, with the biggest pain in the arse being the trauma system. Now I skimmed over this in the alpha, but my god do I hate trauma damage so much. For anyone who needs a reminder, trauma damage is permanent damage to your health and can only be restored using a health station that are scattered around the map. It sounds like an interesting idea on paper, but in practice it's bloody awful. I was already hesitant with this mechanic during the alpha as it makes certain games harder. However, I didn't originally clock onto the fact that trauma damage is caused by everything. Get shot by a teammate? Trauma. You get pinned by a special infected? Justified trauma. A single Ridden punches you in the face? Trauma! You get the picture. On Survivor difficulty, you don't really acknowledge it as much as the difficulty is frankly way too easy, but on Veteran or Nightmare, Trauma becomes an absolute joke. It makes any health item you have pretty much redundant, as pills are the only way to go, and when you find a health station on higher difficulties, you either have one free use of the system or you have to spend 400 copper on it, and if the AI use it before you, you lose your free chance. There's two ways I've considered fixing this. First, trauma damage can only be dealt by special Ridden who can deal heavy damage to you like a bruiser or an ogre, or have it so trauma damage is linked to how many times you go down before you die. So the first time you go down you lose 20 max health, and then the second time you lose 20 again, and so on, and you kind of get the routine. Or, and here's a better idea actually, you could just remove it entirely. Look, I get it, you want to make Back 4 Blood stand out, yet this is not the way to do it. A lot of players don't even know that trauma is a thing in the game because you haven't explained it. If you really want to make trauma a mechanic in Back 4 Blood, introduce a realism mode that adds features like that to it, with permanent deaths and no outlines. With the way it works currently, it completely puts me off wanting to try and beat the game on the harder difficulties because it's so unfair. It's easily my biggest problem with this game. Trauma is fucking awful and I'd be much happier without it. Another thing I'd be happy without actually is, being forced to always play online. I know why they're doing this, it's obviously for the shop and cosmetics they plan to add, but surely this requirement could have been reduced to just that? Just have a simple message saying the shop is currently unavailable, come back later? Why lock us out of the entire game? Also, there's not an option to locally host a session, you have to be at the mercy of a dedicated server. I don't mind doing this as dedicated servers are great for low spec computers and consoles, but given the choice I would rather locally host the game myself instead of being at the mercy of matchmaking, which at the moment is pretty poorly done. When playing this game with a few of my friends, we noticed that instead of prioritising the host or the majority of the party who are based in the UK, the matchmaking system prioritised my one friend from another country, meaning roughly 2 or 3 of us got a ping of 300. Finally, and probably my biggest concern with Back 4 Blood being stuck on dedicated servers is, unlike its predecessor, Back 4 Blood officially now has a shelf life. We're at the mercy of Warner Brothers and Turtle Rock with how long this game lasts, so if Turtle Rock shuts down, or Warner Brothers decide to pull the plug like 2K did with Evolve in the past, we're facing the possibility of having a rather expensive paperweight in our library. And for a game like Back 4 Blood, this is incredibly damaging on the chance of success. You say you want the game to last for years, but forcing us onto dedicated servers with no alternative isn't going to help this. I'm also concerned that they might take the route of using this as a means to force microtransactions on players as well. We know that only one person needs a DLC for your party to play new content, meaning they're cutting themselves short anyway, and I think at this point we need a clear layout of how the game is going to work post-launch, because if it's bombarded with DLC and microtransactions, you're going to drive away a lot of players, which would be a shame because this game is really a lot of fun. And I'm aware that this video has probably come across overly negative, and I won't deny it. This game definitely has problems, but my complaints come from my love of the game. I really want Back 4 Blood to be the best it can be, and I think we're so very close to achieving that. But I think in certain areas it's trying too much. Am I getting the game? Yes, I've already pre-ordered it. Will I come back and review it? Of course. I'm really digging the overall gameplay loop of Back 4 Blood's campaign mode, and I can see myself playing it for a long time. The PvP, however, I don't really know, and I'll see how that plays out, but I wouldn't be surprised if this gets a mixed reception at launch. With parts lacking in polish and the looming concern of monetization around the horizon, I'm not surprised that people are still on the fence, but to look at a positive note, the game is coming to Game Pass day one for both Xbox and PC, so there's an option for people who don't want to buy it outright. But with roughly a month and a half left to go, I'm curious to see what the developers are going to do to improve and change from the beta. I know the game has gone gold already, which probably means that trauma is here to stay forever, unfortunately. But honestly, after Cyberpunk, the term going gold means fuck all now.